The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewing windows of Beacon Prime, the largest neutral space station in the galaxy. Dae Jung stood in the diplomatic reception hall, adjusting his formal uniform for the third time. He hated these gatherings, but humanity needed to make a good impression. They were still the newest members of the Galactic Council, and many of the older species looked down on them. Around him, delegates from 12 different worlds mingled and talked. Some had scales, others had wings, and a few glowed with soft inner light. Dae Jung had spent 6 months learning their customs, their languages, and their politics. It was exhausting work, but someone had to do it. Humanity's reputation depended on people like him getting it right. He noticed the Velian delegation entering through the main doors. They moved like flowing water, their bioluminescent skin casting gentle blue and purple light across the floor. At the center of their group walked Princess Nari, youngest daughter of the Velian Emperor. She wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself, and her eyes held a sadness that Dae Jung recognized. He had seen that same look in the mirror years ago, back when he was a soldier following orders he disagreed with. The reception continued for another hour. Dae Jung spoke with a Krell ambassador who barely hid his contempt for humans. He smiled politely and moved on. This was the game they all played. Politics dressed up as friendship. Then the floor shook. It was subtle at first, just a tremor that made glasses rattle on tables. The conversation stopped. Everyone looked around, confused. Beacon Prime was one of the most stable structures in space. It shouldn't shake. The second impact was stronger. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to wail. Dae Jung's military training kicked in immediately. He looked for exits, counted the people in the room, and assessed the threats. The viewing windows showed something terrible. A cargo transport was tumbling through space, trailing fire and debris. It had collided with the station's outer ring. Chaos erupted. Delegates screamed and ran in different directions. The station's automated voice announced hull breaches in sectors 7 through 12. Emergency bulkheads were sealing. Dae Jung saw the Velian guards trying to reach Princess Nari, but the crowd pushed them back. People were trampling each other in their panic. He made a decision. He pushed through the crowd toward Nari. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. Her telepathic abilities were probably overwhelming her with everyone's terror. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Come with me," he said. Now, she looked at him, confused, but something in his voice made her trust him. They ran together through the corridors as explosions echoed behind them. 3 other delegates followed them. An ambassador from the Tellarian Republic, a trade minister from the Cosmic Union, and a young Velian attendant who refused to leave Nari's side. They reached the emergency pod bay in their section. Dae Jung's heart sank. Half the pods were already gone, and the remaining ones showed red warning lights. Damaged. Unusable. Behind them, another explosion rocked the station. The corridor they had just left was now sealed by an emergency bulkhead. "We're trapped," the Tellarian ambassador said, his voice shaking. The Jung studied their surroundings. There was another pod bay, he remembered from the station maps, just on the other side of that sealed bulkhead. But the controls were on the other side too. Someone would have to go out there and manually override the door. He checked his suit's readings. The area beyond the bulkhead had already decompressed. Hard vacuum. No air. Anyone going out there would have maybe 30 seconds before they died. Most species would be dead in 5 seconds. But humans were different. Humans were stubborn. They could survive in space for a short time if they were prepared. "There's a way," Dae Jung said quietly. Nari looked at him. Her telepathic sense must have picked up his thoughts because her eyes went wide. "No," she said. "You'll die." Maybe, he admitted. But you'll definitely die if we stay here. He explained the plan to the others. They would seal themselves in the small maintenance airlock. He would go through, override the door controls, and they would run for the working pod bay. Simple. Deadly. But simple. This is insane, the trade minister said. You're human. You're fragile. Dae-Young smiled. That's what everyone keeps telling us. Nari grabbed his hand. She was crying, luminescent tears running down her face. Please, don't do this. There has to be another way. There isn't, he said gently. And I'm the only one here who can survive long enough to pull it off. He didn't tell her that surviving meant getting massive injuries. He didn't tell her that the cold of space would probably destroy his lungs. He didn't tell her that he was terrified. Instead, he squeezed her hand once and stepped into the airlock. The others crowded in behind him. He sealed the inner door and put on his helmet. Through the faceplate, he could see Nari's face. She was screaming something, but he couldn't hear it anymore. He gave her a thumbs up and opened the outer door. The vacuum hit him like a wall. His suit held for a few seconds, then the seals started to fail. Planned. He had damaged them himself. He needed mobility more than protection. The cold bit into him immediately. His exposed skin started to freeze. His eyes felt like they would burst from his skull. But he moved. His hands found the override panel. His fingers were already going numb. He ripped off the cover plate and started pulling wires. His training came back to him. Red wire to blue connector. Green wire to yellow terminal. Bypassed the safety locks. His vision was starting to blur. Blood vessels were bursting in his eyes. He could feel his consciousness slipping away. With the last of his strength, he connected the final wire. The bulkhead door groaned and started to open. Air rushed out into space, and with it went Dae-Young. He tumbled into the void, his body broken and freezing. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Nari's face through the open doorway. She was reaching for him, screaming. Then strong hands grabbed him and pulled him inside. The door sealed. Someone was pressing emergency patches to his suit. Someone else was starting chest compressions. Princess Nari knelt beside him, her hands glowing with Velian healing energy. She was pouring everything she had into keeping him alive. The telepathic connection between them formed in that moment, born from desperation and gratitude. He felt her terror, her determination, her absolute refusal to let him die. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please stay with me." Dae-Young tried to answer, but darkness pulled him under. His last thought was that at least she would live. At least his death would mean something. But death was not ready for him yet. Dae-Young woke to soft blue light and the smell of something like lavender. His entire body hurt. Not the sharp pain of fresh injury, but the deep ache of healing tissue. He tried to sit up and failed. His muscles wouldn't respond properly. "Don't move yet," a gentle voice said. "Your body needs more time." He turned his head slowly. A Velian physician stood beside his bed, her skin glowing with soft patterns. Behind her, through a window, he could see a garden filled with plants that definitely weren't from Earth. He was on the Velian homeworld. "How long?" he managed to ask. His voice sounded terrible, rough, and weak. 3 weeks, the physician said. "You were clinically dead for 4 minutes. Your injuries were extreme. We had to use experimental treatments to save you." Dae-Young processed this slowly. 3 weeks. He had been unconscious for 3 weeks. The others? The princes? Everyone survived, the physician assured him. Princess Nari visits every day. She'd be glad to know you're awake. Over the next few days, Dae-Young learned what had happened. The station disaster had killed over 200 people, but it could have been thousands. Investigations revealed it wasn't an accident. The Krell Dominion had sabotaged the cargo transport, trying to make it look like human negligence. They wanted humanity expelled from the Galactic Council. Instead, Dae-Young's heroism had become galactic news. Video footage showed him going into vacuum, showed the princess and others escaping because of his sacrifice. Public opinion had shifted dramatically. Humans were no longer seen as primitive newcomers. They were seen as people of extraordinary courage. "You're a hero," his nurse told him cheerfully. Dae-Young didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had done what needed to be done and gotten lucky enough to survive it. Princess Nari came to visit on his 5th day of consciousness. She looked different from the frightened girl at the station. Her eyes held determination now, a strength that hadn't been there before. She sat beside his bed without asking permission. "You're an idiot," she said softly. "I've been told that before," he replied. "You almost died. For me. For strangers, someone had to." She was quiet for a moment. "My whole life, people have protected me because I'm valuable. Because I'm a princess. Because of what I represent. You protected me because I'm a person." Dae-Young didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They talked for hours. She told him about her life, about the golden cage she had lived in since birth. She told him about her arranged marriage to a Valian noble named Juan, about how she had never been asked what she wanted, what she dreamed about, what kind of life would make her happy. He told her about Earth, about human concepts of freedom and choice, about how humans believed everyone should control their own destiny. It seemed to fascinate her, this idea that a person could choose their own path. "Is that really possible?" she asked. "Just choosing?" "It should be," Dae-Young said. "Everyone deserves that right." Their conversations continued over the following weeks. Dae-Young's recovery was slow but steady. The Valian treatments had worked, but there were side effects. His cells had integrated Valian biotechnology. He was stronger now, healed faster, but he was also changed in ways the physicians were still studying. One morning, he woke up feeling Nari's emotions. She was sad about something, but she was hundreds of meters away in another part of the medical complex. That shouldn't be possible. When she visited later, he told her about it. Her face went pale. "I felt you wake up," she admitted. "I've been feeling your emotions for days now. I thought I was imagining it." The physicians confirmed their fears. The experimental treatment that saved Dae-Young's life had created a telepathic bond between him and Nari. In Valian culture, such bonds were sacred. They only formed between life partners, between souls meant to be together. The news spread quickly. Within days, the Valian royal court was in an uproar. A princess bonded to a human? It was unthinkable. It was scandalous. It had to be corrected. Juan arrived at the medical facility with an entire entourage. He was tall and imposing, with skin that glowed like cold starlight. He looked at Dae-Young the way someone might look at an insect. "The human who causes so much trouble," Juan said. His voice was smooth and dangerous. "How fortunate that you survived. And how unfortunate about this little complication." "It's not a complication," Nari said firmly. "It's a bond." "It's a medical error," Juan corrected her. "Nothing more. The physicians have already prepared a procedure to sever it. Simple surgery, no risk." Dae-Young watched Nari's face. She looked trapped again, the way she had at the station before everything went wrong. The strength he had seen growing in her was being crushed under the weight of duty and expectation. "What if we refuse?" Dae-Young asked. Juan turned his cold eyes on him. "You forget your place, human. This is a matter of Valian royal concern. Your opinion is irrelevant." "He has every right to speak," Nari said. "The bond involves him too." "The bond," Juan said with barely controlled anger, "is an embarrassment. To you, to your family, to our people. It will be corrected. He left with his entourage. Nari stayed behind, her hands shaking. Through the bond, Dae-young felt her conflict. Part of her wanted to comply, to do what was expected. But another part, the part that had grown stronger over their weeks of conversation, rebelled against it. "You should agree to the surgery," Dae-young said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. "I'm serious," he continued. "This bond is making your life harder. I never wanted that. You have enough problems without adding me to the list." "What about what I want?" she asked. "What do you want?" Nari was quiet for a long time. "I want to make my own choices, even if they're the wrong ones, even if they make things complicated. I'm tired of other people deciding everything for me." "Then refuse the surgery," Dae-young said. "They'll make our lives difficult, probably. They might try to discredit you, to discredit humanity. Let them try." She smiled. And through the bond, he felt her gratitude and determination. "You're still an idiot. I've been told that before." The next day, Nari formally refused the surgery. The Velian court was furious. Juan made thinly veiled threats about humanity's position in the Galactic Council. Political analysts predicted a diplomatic crisis. But something else was happening too. Young Velans were watching Princess Nari make her own choice, and it inspired them. Messages of support flooded in from across the galaxy. Humans weren't the only ones who valued freedom, it turned out. Many species admired courage, admired someone willing to stand up for themselves. In his recovery room, Dae-young wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had just wanted to save people at a space station. Now he was at the center of a political firestorm that could reshape galactic politics. Through the bond, he felt Nara's thoughts. She was wondering the same thing. But underneath her worry, there was something else. Hope. For the first time in her life, she had made a real choice. Whatever came next, at least it would be her decision. Dae-young closed his eyes and tried to rest. His body was healing, but the real challenges were just beginning. Neither of them knew how right that feeling was. 2 months after the Beacon Prime disaster, Dae-young returned to active duty. His new assignment was investigating the attack itself. The Galactic Council wanted answers. Someone had killed hundreds of people and nearly started an interspecies war. They needed to be held accountable. Dae-young worked with a small team of investigators from different species. The evidence against the Krell was clear, but something bothered him. The Krell weren't subtle. They were warriors who believed in direct confrontation. This attack had been carefully planned, precisely executed. It didn't match their usual methods. He spent long hours reviewing security footage, analyzing debris patterns, and interviewing survivors. His Velian biotechnology meant he needed less sleep now, which was useful because he couldn't stop thinking about the case. Nari was dealing with her own problems. Her engagement to Juan was supposed to happen in 4 months. The wedding had been planned since she was a child. Breaking it off would cause a major scandal, but she was seriously considering it. Through their bond, Dae-young felt her stress constantly. They met when they could, usually in quiet gardens or private rooms where they could talk freely. She told him about growing frustrations with the royal court, about how Juan had become colder and more controlling since the bonding incident, about how she felt like her life was a prison made of silk and tradition. "I've been reading about human history," she said one evening. They sat in a garden on the Velian diplomatic compound. Earth plants grew alongside Velian ones, an experiment in cooperation. You had revolutions, times when people fought against rulers who controlled them. "We did," Dae-young admitted. "Bloody ones? I wouldn't recommend it as a first option." "What would you recommend?" "Finding the truth. Information is power. If you understand what's really happening, you can make better choices." She thought about this. I could access the royal archives. There are records going back thousands of years. Maybe there's something useful there. Be careful, Tae-young warned. If Juan is as controlling as you say, he won't like you investigating things. But Nari had made up her mind. Over the next week, she spent hours in the archives, reading old treaties and marriage contracts. What she found disturbed her. The marriage to Juan wasn't just political tradition. It was part of something bigger. She met Tae-young in secret and showed him what she had discovered. Juan's family had been planning this marriage for decades. According to ancient Velian law, if certain conditions were met, a noble house could claim the throne through marriage. Juan's family had been carefully arranging those conditions. Once he married Nari, all he needed was for her family to be declared unfit to rule. Then his family would take over. This is a coup, Tae-young said, studying the documents. A slow-motion coup. My father doesn't know, Nari said. No one does. They've been so careful. We need to tell someone. Who? The royal court is full of Juan's allies. My father's advisors won't believe accusations against one of the most powerful families. I have no proof of anything illegal, just suspicious patterns. Tae-young thought about his own investigation. About how the Krell attack hadn't made sense. About how someone inside the Galactic Council seemed to be protecting the conspirators. A terrible suspicion formed in his mind. What if Beacon Prime wasn't about humanity at all? He said slowly, "What if it was about you?" Nari stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. You were at that station. So were several of your father's closest allies. If the attack had succeeded, it would have killed you and weakened your family's position. Who would benefit from that?" "Juan," she whispered. "But that would mean he tried to kill me. And failed because a human got in the way," Tae-young continued. "That would explain why he hates me so much. I ruined his plan." They sat in silence, the weight of this realization settling over them. If Juan had orchestrated Beacon Prime, he was far more dangerous than they had thought. He had killed hundreds of people just to clear his path to power. "We need proof," Nari said. "We need to survive," Tae-young corrected. "If Juan realizes we're onto him, he'll try again." He was right to be worried. 3 days later, assassins struck. It happened during a diplomatic ceremony at the Velian Palace. Tae-young was attending as part of the human delegation. Nari was required to be there, sitting beside Juan like a dutiful fiancé. The ceremony was boring, full of long speeches about cooperation and peace. Tae-young felt Nari's spike of fear through the bond. He looked up just as armed figures burst through the side doors. They wore combat armor with no identifying marks. Their weapons were Velian military grade. Everyone started screaming and running. Tae-young moved on instinct, pushing through the crowd toward Nari. He saw her trying to run, saw Juan abandoning her to save himself. The assassins were targeting her specifically, ignoring everyone else. He reached her just as the first assassin took aim. Without thinking, Tae-young threw himself in front of her. The plasma bolt caught him in the chest, burning through his formal jacket and scorching his skin. The pain was incredible, but his Velian enhancements kept him conscious. Palace guards finally responded, engaging the assassins. In the chaos, Tae-young and Nari managed to escape through a service corridor. He collapsed against a wall, clutching his burned chest. The wound wasn't fatal, but it hurt worse than vacuum exposure had. "Why do you keep doing this?" Nari asked, crying as she tried to stop his bleeding. "Because someone has to," he managed to say. Security forces found them a few minutes later. The assassins were all dead or captured. The investigation began immediately. The captured assassins all said the same thing under interrogation. They had been hired by Krell, sympathizers to strike at the Velian royal family. But Tae-young didn't believe it. The timing was too convenient. He and Nari had just discovered Juan's conspiracy, and suddenly assassins attacked. It had to be connected. He spent 2 days recovering in a medical facility. Through the bond, he felt Nari's constant worry and guilt. She visited when she could, always looking exhausted. "I found something," she told him on the second day. One of the assassins had a communication device. Security overlooked it, but I managed to access the data before they secured the evidence. "That's illegal," De-Jong said. "So is attempted murder," she replied. The messages on the device trace back to a secure server in Juan's estate. "That's our proof," De-Jong said, sitting up despite the pain. "But it's not enough. Any good lawyer could explain it away. We need more. We need to access that server directly." "That's impossible. Juan's estate is a fortress. Even royal authority can't get us in there without cause." De-Jong thought about his military training, about operations he had run in his younger days, about infiltration and intelligence gathering, about the kinds of missions that never appeared in official reports. "Nothing's impossible," he said. "Just difficult." They spent the next week planning. Nari used her connections to gather information about Juan's security systems. De-Jong contacted old military friends, people who owed him favors. A plan slowly took shape. Dangerous, probably insane, but possible. "If we're caught, it'll be considered an act of war," Nari warned. "Infiltrating a noble's estate without authorization? They could execute you." "Then we won't get caught," De-Jong said simply. Through their bond, she felt his determination. It matched her own. They had come too far to back down now. Juan had tried to kill her twice, had killed hundreds of others, and was planning to steal the Valian throne. Someone had to stop him. And if that meant breaking a few laws, well, De-Jong had never been very good at following rules anyway. The night of the infiltration, De-Jong gathered his team in a safe location far from the Valian capital. There were 4 of them total. G1 was a human cyber warfare specialist, small and quiet with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Tae-min was a combat medic, former military like De-Jong. And Kyung-hee was one of Nari's royal guards, a valiant woman who had grown suspicious of Juan after the assassination attempt. "This is your last chance to back out," De-Jong told them. "What we're doing tonight could start a war if it goes wrong." "I'm in," G1 said immediately. "I've seen the evidence. Someone needs to stop this guy." "I go where you go," Tae-min said with a shrug. "We've been through worse." Kyung-hee was quiet for a moment. "I swore an oath to protect the royal family. If Juan is threatening them, then this is exactly what I should be doing." Nari arrived last, wearing dark clothes instead of her usual royal robes. De-Jong had argued against her coming, but she refused to stay behind. Through their bond, he felt her determination. This was her fight as much as his. They traveled to Juan's estate in a stolen cargo transport. The estate was massive, built into a mountainside with gardens that stretched for kilometers. Security patrols moved in predictable patterns. De-Jong had studied those patterns for days. The cover story was simple. Juan was hosting a celebration for his upcoming wedding. Hundreds of guests, dozens of staff, chaos everywhere. They would slip in with the catering crew, access the data core in Juan's private office, and slip out before anyone noticed. "Remember," G1 said as they approached the service entrance, "I need 10 minutes to crack the data core. Maybe 15 if it has better security than I expect. You all keep me safe for that long, and we're good." They entered with the catering staff, their forged credentials passing inspection. Inside, the estate was beautiful and intimidating. Everything was designed to show wealth and power. Valiant nobles danced in the main ballroom, while servants rushed everywhere preparing food and drinks. De-Jong felt Nari's nervousness through the bond. She recognized many of these people. Friends, family members, political allies. If they were discovered, her reputation would be destroyed forever. But she kept moving forward, pretending to be part of the catering staff. Juan's private office was in the upper levels, away from the celebration. Getting there meant moving through secured corridors, bypassing multiple checkpoints. Kyung-hee used her Royal Guard credentials at the first checkpoint. The guards recognized her and let them pass, assuming she was on official business. The second checkpoint was trickier. Two guards who didn't know Kyung-hee stood watch. Taemin created a distraction, spilling a tray of drinks and making a huge commotion. While the guards dealt with him, the others slipped past. They reached Juan's office without further incident. Ji-won immediately went to work on the data core, her fingers flying across holographic controls. Dae-young and Kyung-hee stood guard at the door. Nari helped Ji-won, using her knowledge of Velian systems to bypass security protocols. "This is worse than we thought," Ji-won whispered as data began flowing across her screens. Juan isn't just planning a coup. He's been working with the Krell for years. Dae-young looked at the screens. Financial transfers, secret communications, military plans. Juan had promised the Krell access to Velian territory in exchange for military support. Once he controlled the Velian Empire, he would let them establish bases throughout Velian space. It would destabilize the entire galactic region. "He's been planning this for decades," Nari said, her voice shaking. "The marriage, the assassination attempts, all of it. How did no one see this?" "Because he was patient," Dae-young said. "And because he hid behind tradition. Everyone assumed he was just another noble following the old ways." Ji-won downloaded everything she could find. Evidence of Beacon Prime's sabotage, proof of the assassination attempts, records of Krell collaboration. It was enough to bring down not just Juan, but dozens of his co-conspirators. Then alarms started blaring. "We've been detected," Kyung-hee said, checking her communication device. "Security is locking down the building. They're sending guards to this location. How much more time do you need?" Dae-young asked Ji-won. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. "We don't have 3 minutes," Taemin said from his position near the window. "I can see security teams moving through the gardens. They'll be here in 1 minute." Dae-young made a decision. "Get the data and run. All of you. Head for the service entrance we used to come in." "What about you?" Nari asked, though through their bond she already knew the answer. "Someone needs to slow them down." "No," she said firmly. "Not again. You're not sacrificing yourself again." "It's what I'm good at," he said with a sad smile. "Ji-won, take the data to the Galactic Council. Taemin, protect Nari. Kyung-hee, make sure the truth comes out. And Nari?" He touched her face gently. "Be free. Choose your own path. That's all I ever wanted for you." Through their bond, she felt everything. His fear, his determination, his absolute certainty that this was necessary. She wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but there wasn't time. "I'll come back for you," she promised. "I know." Ji-won finished the download. The team moved quickly toward the exit. Dae-young grabbed a plasma rifle from the office security locker and positioned himself at the corridor entrance. He could hear boots pounding on the floors below. Dozens of guards, maybe more. He thought about Earth, about the home he might never see again, about his family, his friends, the life he had left behind to serve in space, about how strange it was that he would die on an alien world, protecting people he had barely known a few months ago. Through the bond, he felt Nari's anguish as she ran. He sent her what comfort he could. At least she would survive. At least she would be free. The first guards reached his position. Dae-young opened fire. The confined corridor worked in his favor. They couldn't surround him, couldn't use their superior numbers effectively. But they would eventually, he knew. There were too many of them. He fought like a cornered animal, with desperation and fury. His Valiant enhancements made him faster and stronger than a normal human, but he was still just one person against an army. Plasma bolts hit his armor. Some got through, burning his flesh. He kept fighting. Through the bond, he felt Nari reach safety. Felt her in the stolen transport, flying away from the estate. The relief almost made him lower his guard. Almost. More guards came. Dae-Young's ammunition ran low. His armor was failing. His body was covered in burns and wounds. He fell back slowly, making them pay for every meter they advanced. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. A plasma bolt caught him in the leg. He went down hard, his leg refusing to support his weight anymore. More shots hit him. His chest, his shoulder, his other leg. The pain was incredible, beyond anything he had experienced before. His vision started to blur. He fell against the wall, his rifle slipping from his hands. Blood ran down his face. Through the fading bond, he felt Nari screaming his name. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that this was worth it, but he couldn't form the words. The guards surrounded him. Through his damaged vision, he saw Juan pushing through the crowd. The Valiant noble's face was twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything," Juan said, his voice cold. "Everything I worked for. Everything I planned. Destroyed by one stubborn human who couldn't mind his own business." Dae-Young tried to smile. Blood filled his mouth. "Someone had to," he managed to say. Juan raised his weapon. The world seemed to slow down. Dae-Young thought about Nari, about how she would be free now, about how humanity's reputation in the galaxy would survive, about how sometimes one person could change everything. Then Galactic Council security forces burst through the walls. Armed soldiers in official uniforms surrounded everyone. An officer pointed his weapon at Juan. "Lower your weapon and surrender. You're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason." Juan's face went pale. He looked at his guards, but they were already dropping their weapons. The game was over. Dae-Young's consciousness was fading fast. He felt hands lifting him, heard urgent voices calling for medical assistance. Through the bond, he felt Nara's desperate hope. She was begging him to hold on, to survive one more time. He wanted to. He really did. But darkness was pulling at him, cold and absolute. His last thought before it took him was that at least he had saved her. At least this time, his sacrifice had truly meant something. For 3 days, Dae-Young floated in darkness. Sometimes he heard voices, felt hands touching him, sensed light beyond his closed eyelids. But consciousness remained just out of reach, like trying to grab smoke. The physicians worked around the clock. Human doctors and Valiant healers collaborated, sharing knowledge and techniques. His injuries were severe. Multiple plasma burns, a shattered leg, internal bleeding, system shock. The medical team gave him a 30% chance of survival. But they hadn't counted on human stubborn refusal to die. When Dae-Young finally woke, Nari was sitting beside his bed. She looked terrible. Her skin had lost its luminescent glow. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice breaking. "I know," he replied weakly. "You keep telling me that." She started crying then, really crying. He reached out with his good hand, and she grabbed it, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. Through their bond, he felt her emotions. Relief, joy, anger, fear, and love all mixed together. "The doctor said you might not wake up," she whispered. "They said the damage was too severe." "They don't know humans very well," Dae-Young said. "We're hard to kill." The trial of Juan and his co-conspirators began a week later. The evidence Guy 1 had recovered was overwhelming. Financial records, communication logs, strategic plans, everything needed to prove the conspiracy. Juan had tried to destroy empires, to kill hundreds of people, all for personal power. The Galactic Council held the trial publicly. Representatives from every member species attended. The galaxy watched as the evidence was presented, as witness after witness testified to Juan's crimes. The scope of it shocked everyone. He hadn't just targeted Nari and her family. He had planned to reshape galactic politics entirely, with himself at the center. Dae-Yoon watched the trial from his hospital bed through video feeds. Nari sat with him, translating the parts his language implant couldn't handle. Together they watched as Juan's perfect facade crumbled. He tried to defend himself, tried to claim he was acting for the good of the Valian Empire. No one believed him. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. The sentence was permanent exile in a maximum security prison dimension, a place where time moved differently. 1 year in the normal universe equaled 10 years there. Juan would spend the equivalent of centuries locked away. "It's over," Nari said when the sentence was announced. But it wasn't over. Not really. The trial had changed things. The investigation into Juan's conspiracy had revealed corruption throughout the Galactic Council. Dozens of officials resigned or were arrested. The whole system was being rebuilt, made more transparent and accountable. And humanity's role had changed too. No one doubted human courage anymore. No one questioned their place in the galaxy. Dae-Young had become a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the youngest species understood old truths better than ancient civilizations. The recovery was long and difficult. Dae-Young's injuries were too severe for even Velian technology to completely repair. His right leg was replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic. His lung capacity was permanently reduced. Scars covered his chest and arms, reminders of the price he had paid. "You'll never be combat ready again," the doctors told him. "Your body has been through too much." He accepted this with quiet resignation. His fighting days were over. But maybe that was okay. Maybe he had done enough fighting. Nari made her own decisions during this time. With Juan's arrest, her arranged marriage was cancelled. The Valian High Court offered to find her another suitable match, another political alliance. She refused. Instead, she announced her intention to step back from direct royal succession. She would remain a princess, but she wanted to serve the Empire in a different way. As an ambassador for Valian-human cooperation. As someone who could bridge the gap between species. The court was scandalized. Princes choosing their own paths? Rejecting political marriages? It went against centuries of tradition. But Nari stood firm. She had learned from Dae-Young that sometimes you had to break tradition to do what was right. The Valian High Court also offered to sever the telepathic bond between her and Dae-Young. The bond was stable now, no longer a medical emergency. But they could remove it safely if she wished. Nari refused. In a public statement that shocked the galaxy, she declared that the bond wasn't a mistake or a complication. It was a gift. It had brought her together with someone who taught her the meaning of sacrifice and courage. She wouldn't deny it, wouldn't pretend it didn't exist. "This bond changed my fate," she said in her statement. "I'm grateful for it." The public reaction was mixed. Traditional Velans were horrified. But younger Velans, and many from other species, were inspired. Here was a princess who chose her own path, who refused to let others decide her destiny. It started conversations across the galaxy about freedom, choice, and the rights of individuals. 6 months after the trial, Dae-Yoon was finally cleared to leave medical care. He accepted a position as head of Human Velian Joint Security, working to prevent future conspiracies and strengthen cooperation between the species. It was desk work mostly, strategy and planning rather than field operations. His fighting days were over, but his service wasn't. Nari worked alongside him, using her position and connections to build bridges between worlds. They made a good team. Where he was practical and direct, she was diplomatic and thoughtful. Where she understood alien psychology, he understood human determination. Together they accomplished things neither could have done alone. The bond between them grew stronger over time. It was no longer just sensing emotions. They could share thoughts, communicate without words, understand each other on a level that went beyond language. Some people found it strange. Others found it beautiful. One evening, 2 years after Beacon Prime, they stood together on an observation deck of a new space station. It was called Dae-Young's Hope, named in honor of his sacrifice. The station was a joint human-Velian project, a symbol of cooperation between species. Ships from dozens of worlds arrive for the dedication ceremony. Representatives from every council species attended. This station would serve as a center for cultural exchange, for scientific cooperation, for building understanding between civilizations. Do you ever regret it? Nari asked. The sacrifices you made? The life you gave up? Dae-Young thought about this. About the body he had lost, the career he could never return to, the normal life that would never be his. About pain and recovery and endless medical procedures. No, he said finally. I regret nothing. Why not? Because look what came from it. He gestured at the station, at the ship's gathering, at the representatives preparing for the ceremony. You're free. Juan's conspiracy was stopped. Humans have a real place in the galaxy now, and I'm alive to see it all. That's more than enough. Through their bond, she felt his sincerity. He truly meant it. All the pain, all the sacrifice, he would do it again if necessary. You changed my fate, she said softly. I was supposed to be a political pawn, married to a monster, living a life I never chose. Instead, I'm here, free to make my own decisions, free to choose my own path. You gave me that. You changed yourself, Dae-Young corrected. I just showed you it was possible. The ceremony began. Speakers from different worlds talked about cooperation and peace. They talked about the lessons learned from Juan's conspiracy. They talked about how one person's courage can inspire thousands. When it was Dae-Young's turn to speak, he kept it simple. He talked about how every species brings something valuable to the galaxy. How humans bring determination and courage. Velians bring wisdom and compassion. And everyone has something to teach each other. He talked about how the best futures aren't inherited or arranged. They're fought for and earned through sacrifice. The audience applauded. Through the bond, he felt Nari's pride and love. After everything they had been through, after all the pain and struggle, they had built something meaningful. As the ceremony ended, ships from human and Velian fleets performed a joint honor flight. They moved in perfect synchronization, a display of trust and cooperation that would have been impossible just 3 years ago. The station's lights illuminated the darkness, a beacon of hope in the vastness of space. Nari took Dae-Young's hand. Through their bond, they shared a single thought, that sometimes the galaxy's course is changed not by ancient empires or powerful fleets, but by individual people making difficult choices. By someone willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. By someone showing others that freedom is worth any price. Dae-Young looked at his cybernetic leg, at the scars covering his arms, at the station named after him. His body was broken, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He had saved people. He had stopped the conspiracy. He had helped Nari become the person she was meant to be. And maybe most importantly, he had shown the galaxy that humans belonged here. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they understood something essential. That courage means standing up even when you're afraid. That sacrifice means giving up what you value for something more important. That freedom is a right, not a privilege. 5 years after Beacon Prime, Humanity was no longer questioned or doubted. They were respected partners in the Galactic Council. And it was all because one man had been